I'm working on the 10 paintings that we're going to use in an auction later on this year to raise funds. We got a $100,000 matching grant from the Knights Foundation. So we're going to do an art exhibit, an art auction later on this year. And it's going to take place in California. There's some artists out there have donated some of their art, and they asked me to produce 10 pieces for the auction using found objects, attaching stuff to the boards. But I'm priming the boards up now, so when I get to that stage, it won't look so contrived as though I just throw some stuff up. But the goal is to raise $100,000. We feel we have a better chance of raising that money if we give the donators something, and that would be in terms of bidding on some art, where their donation will be tax deductible, but they still will get a piece of art created by some artists and myself. I have no idea in which direction this will turn out, but my process for everything that's around here starts out like this. It really started 1971. I worked at the Museum of African American History as the artist in residence curator. In the African community, there's a lot of complaining about how we mimic the European culture, but we never consider the fact that the European also mimic and assimilate our culture. I had an art gallery where I was selling African material culture, and then I decided to do an African bead museum. A lady named Artie Riddick donated the 2 buildings behind me to build the museum on a handshake. We moved here, and we were not able to go forward because we needed money to turn the building into a museum. So we started building these installations out here, which was the best thing that could have happened, because these installations attract people from all over the world coming to see what's going on here. This installation I built to remind people how we just use all these resources just to satisfy our own needs and desires without paying any attention to the balance of the universe, just a total misuse of nature's resources. It's all kinds of people talk about going into various trance when they do certain things. But the Africans had mastered that art when the Europeans showed up, until they saw things they could not explain because it was not a part of their culture. So they discarded it as being magic, something that had no relevance. But all of that stuff points to where the European is at now with quantum physics. There's a term called entangled, meaning that we all are connected through the brain. And that's where the African did his best work. So we really can accept the fact that we can do whatever we want with our brain. It's just a matter of affirming it, knowing that it will happen. The reason why the city never saw this, because I said you will not be able to see this with my magic. Now our brains are entangled, so they are getting this information, and therefore they don't see it until it's time to acknowledge that it exists. In 2009, this house became available. This is an Nkisi. An Nkisi is from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It's where you got your protection, your security came from the Nkisi. And Nkisi deals with magic and medicine. It works on the principle of the use of iron. But I've also placed symbols. The circle and the dot, that represents the ancestor. The dots are the children. So you're always sandwiched in between those who came before you and those you are leaving the place for. So we have a special relationship with animals, wood, mirrors, etc., because those are the things our ancestors have used. But if people are communicating with each other, then they realize immediately that there's very little difference between each other, and they can feel this stuff. Molecule. If you split that atom, send one part to the furthest part of the universe and keep one part here. Whatever you do to that part here, you've done to that part at the farthest point on this galaxy that we're in. So we are made up of atoms. So we're entangled. So that means we can communicate with anything on this planet has the ability to communicate. People come by here all the time and say, man, you know, I can feel you. And I know what they're talking about. See, we don't have a language in this country to talk about that which goes on within ourselves. When I first started this business, I was caught up in the arena of line for sale. So a guy came in, he said, man, I want some bees to give me some good luck. So I didn't have any money, so I sold him 6 bees for $60 and said, man, with these bees, all your luck is gonna change. Now, he hit the lottery. So he came back a year later, brought his whole family and said, I want you to sell them some bees that would give them some good luck. But by then, I had a better grasp as to what was going on. I said, there was nothing about those bees that gave you that good luck. It was just you just won, period. And I said to the family, I said, I can sell you these bees, but this is how they work. You're gonna empower those bees to do what you want them to do. No one on this planet before, in the present, or in the future has no more power than you. You just don't accept the power that you have. Just say what you want these bees to do for you, and it's gonna happen.
And there's the root of selfishness is what evil is, right?
Yeah.
When you do it for selfish reasons, it's black magic.
Yeah. Well, all of those terms are terms that's created to confuse us. There is no evil. There is no bad. It's just what happened. If you think in terms of evil and bad, just look at what happens in the animal world. When an animal get hungry, that animal that he grabbed, was that animal having a bad luck day? No, it's just part of the food chain. So the more we learn about our past, the better position that we're in. And the repetitiveness of symbols, there's a term in Africa that they only observe in Africa called fractals, where things are built small, large, but it's always the same thing. Just keep the same repetitive patterns and people will perceive them different. I want you to feel comfortable and just enjoy the experience. And if you see me out somewhere and ask me, I said, well, that exhibit with the cake on the table, they're going to immediately go, I said, oh, that's Iron Teaching Rock's table manner. I could build something that was based on principles out of Africa and have that connect with everyone on the planet. Because I stumbled across Entangled when I was in college in the 80s. I just couldn't get away from that, the idea that we all are connected. I said, okay, we'll try it out. Well, I came from the first African American museum in this country. At the time it was called the African American Museum, but now it's called the Charles H. Wright Museum. So my interest was in the history of African people, which constantly surprised me. And I was a curator, so it was my responsibility to research the exhibits. During the 80s, they had festivals downtown Detroit, and these African traders, what they were calling them, and dealers, started bringing stuff directly to Detroit from Africa. So I hoarded. I just purchased all of those beads I could find. Had never sold a bead before, didn't know of any bead stores, and it caught on. People were just buying the beads because of what they looked like. And in the 80s also, there was about 3 or 4 good books that were written by scholars on African beads, and it talked more about how the beads were used as opposed to, most of the books I had read were dealing with the commercial aspect of beads, not the ethnographic. So these beads changed my whole concept of the significance of beads. I thought African art at the time was different than African textiles, or African sculpture, carving, etc. But to my amazement, they all served the same purpose. But the beads had a greater purposes because the beads could be worn every day and they communicated specific information. If a mother was pregnant, she wore beads that everyone in the community knew she was pregnant, and those beads would protect her and the unborn child. So beads was used as secrets concealed or secrets revealed. Beads that were used in this country were the same beads that were traded in Africa. And trade beads was a special type of bead that was used just for trading. But some of the beads in Africa date back 70,000 years. In Mali and South Africa, they've unearthed beads that's dated back 15,000 years. So people were adorning themselves with beads long before we developed a larynx. The larynx is supposed to be about 50,000 years old, so we could communicate, but we were communicating with beads long before we were communicating with our voice. And once I established myself as a serious purchaser of beads, folks came in from all parts of Africa, bringing their beads, sitting them on the counter, and saying, take what you want, and we'll work out a way you can pay me later. So I got this notion of opening an African bead museum. And so I began to take the best of everything that I was purchasing to set aside to put in this African bead museum. A lot of the beads that are in this store, especially the ones that are hanging from the ceiling down, are over 300 years old. And so that's how we've operated here, just relying on these things that are in here to protect us. These beads are 300, I have some in here that are 700 years old. There's an energy in that stuff. And because of my reading about quantum physics and so on, I'm relying more on that than you can ever imagine, that our brains are entangled. So if you don't pick up anything in me saying this is of value, then it has no commercial value. The beads that are in the collection are not on display here. All these beads are for display purposes too. I have boxes and boxes of African beads. That's for the collection. But now, because of the exhibit, people will help because they can see that. They can't see the bead collection. Now can they see the value of a bead collection? So as opposed to sitting around here just trying to figure out how we're going to make some money, I started doing this installation out here about 12 years ago. Now it has earned a right for its own being. So now we could do a bead museum and create a group of people that will come see the beads.